Although my gaze will remain on the future, as it always has, I hope that you, the young people of this country, will fashion that future and protect our democracy. Now it's time for me to go. It's been an honor serving my country alongside all of you. Thank you and farewell.
That is former Liberal Cabinet Minister Marc Garneau in his final speech in the House of Commons before he resigned back in March of 2023. Garneau has, of course, a lengthy resume that also includes being the first Canadian to fly in space and a naval officer. Many of those experiences are touched on in his new memoir, A Most Extraordinary Ride, Space, Politics, and the Pursuit of a Canadian Dream. That book is out now, and he is with us live from Toronto. Hi, Mr. Garneau. Great to see you. Thank you for making the time.
Nice to be with you, Vassy.
I wanted to start off on a question that kind of brings into focus your time in foreign affairs, but not just in foreign affairs, because you reference in the book 2 instances in which you went to the Middle East, and in particular, one when you were serving in that role. And you said at the time, this was even 2.5, 3 years ago, that your sense after talking to Jewish thought leaders and people in Israel was that support for a two-state solution was already waning. After what's transpired in the interim, and particularly because of the day that we're marking today, I'm wondering if you think one is still possible.
It's a challenge. There's no question about it. But if you look at the future of the Middle East, I think the only way to ensure a lasting solution is to have a two-state solution. And that has been Canada's position from the beginning. I know it presents with a great deal of challenges to make that happen, but I think ultimately, if we don't want to repeat the cycles of violence indefinitely, a two-state solution is the only viable one.
You also write that, and I think this is in your time as an opposition critic, even in the third party, that you weren't necessarily inflating Canada's significance in the region, but you did feel that we could play a constructive role. Do you feel that we are playing a constructive role in the conflict as it exists in the moment?
Well, I think Canadians have always hoped that Canada could be a voice that could be added to the dialogue in complex situations such as in the Middle East, and that we would be able to, in some way, make a contribution. And we have done that historically over past decades, and I think we need to continue to try to do that. We can't inflate the value of our voice. We are a middle power, but I think that Canada has in the past made some sensible suggestions to try to resolve conflicts, and I think we should try to continue to do that.
Is your sense that we are doing that right now?
Well, at the moment, I think the temperature is white hot in the Middle East, and I think at this moment there are challenges in trying to bring about, for example, a ceasefire in Gaza, that kind of thing. But it doesn't mean that we should stop saying what needs to be said, and I hope we will continue to do that.
You write about Canada's standing in the world and your reflections on the way in which we're perceived, based not only in your, while you were Foreign Affairs Minister, but outside it. But there are some interesting things that you walk away saying, I thought, particularly given the fact that you did serve in that portfolio. Canada's standing on the world stage has slipped. We are losing credibility. Pronouncements are not always matched. We're not always matched by a capacity to act. And finally, the notion that Canada punches beyond its weight hasn't been credible for a long time. Those are some pretty specific comments and renderings and conclusions drawn on the perception of Canada in the world. Do you think that, how much of that do you attribute to the possibility that the Prime Minister doesn't take the portfolio seriously, which is something you even concede is possible given how many people occupied that portfolio? How high the turnover was, I think you said.
I think the fact that our voice doesn't carry as much weight as it used to carry, and we'd have to go back several decades, not just the past 9 years, is due to the fact that we have not, with respect to, for example, our contribution to global security, I don't think that we have put sufficient emphasis on making sure that our armed forces are of a certain size and being well equipped so that we are in a position to back up our words with actions by having a size of military force that can, for example, be closer to the 2% in NATO, and be used also in other areas of conflict. In other words, we need to pay more attention to re-equipping our armed forces and giving them more priority, because then I think our voice with our allies will carry a greater weight. The other area I think that's important is that Canada has traditionally been very good in foreign affairs in its dealings with most of the world, but the area that really requires us to put more attention to is now the Indo-Pacific. That's where the center of gravity of, I think, of world affairs and geopolitics has shifted. And I think we need to do more with respect to countries like China and India and South Korea and the ASEAN countries. I think we need to put a strong focus on that area, because I think there we haven't put enough focus over time. We can do these things, but it's going to take time.
On the former, the first point that you made, do you think anyone believes we will actually meet the 2% target, which we've now finally in the summer announced we actually will aim to do by 2032?
Well, it's a long way away, 2032, and it does require a very, very strong commitment. And it also depends to a certain amount on how you account for that 2%, what's included in that 2%. But it's very, very clear. We've been criticized by our allies that we're not contributing enough to NATO. And I think, you know, I started off in my career in the Navy, and back in the 80s, I started to feel that there wasn't enough attention paid to making sure that our men and women were properly equipped and that we could really carry out all the mandates that we were called upon to do. We were being stretched pretty thin. Now I think we're being stretched even more thinly. And it's going to take a while to rebuild those forces. I hope we're going to get to that 2%, but it does imply some very, very serious amounts of budgeting devoted towards building up our military.
I asked about the perception of whether or not the Prime Minister takes the portfolio of foreign affairs seriously, because it's something you speculate on in the book when you talk about when you assumed it, and there had been a number of people, like the turnover you said was high. Did you arrive at a conclusion about whether or not the Prime Minister does take the portfolio seriously?
Well, when I was appointed, I was the fourth minister in a little over 5 years to go to foreign affairs, and I mentioned in the book that when I made all my initial calls to my counterparts, they all sort of jokingly at the end said, "We sure hope you're going to be in the position longer than your predecessors." And I think they were sending a not so subtle message there. Now, I am delighted at the fact that my successor has been there for 3 years, and that's very, very good. Because I think that international affairs, whether it's foreign affairs, whether it is international development or it's in international trade, where you deal with other countries, it's very important not only to put adequate resources in those departments, but also to build the personal relationships with the countries with which you're dealing. And that requires the ministers in those portfolios, I think, to be there for a certain amount of time.
Now, you're not a politician anymore, but you didn't answer the specific part of my question, which was, do you believe the Prime Minister takes the portfolio of foreign affairs seriously?
I'm not going to answer that question because, you know, I've been removed from that portfolio for 3 years and I'm retired. I simply saying that international affairs, although Canadians are generally more focused on domestic issues such as, you know, the cost of living and things like that, they do care about Canada's place in the world, and they like to think that we have a voice that is listened to in the world. And I have already told you where I think we need to do a little bit of work, and I hope that that's good advice. I hope it is.
Okay. I'll politely point out that not answering the question is an answer in and of itself, but I will move on because I also thought the earlier part of your political, and it's a great book, I should say, first of all. I knew a lot about your political career and some about being an astronaut, but it's interesting to read it all in one place, particularly for me, obviously, as a political junkie, the political stuff. I had forgotten the amount of sort of liberal down times you had lived through. The fact that, you know, you even started running in a time where the liberal fortunes were on the way down. You lived through the Ignatieff years, the Dion years, and then ultimately, obviously, through the Trudeau years. And I was thinking also about your riding and some of the reflections you had about riding in Quebec and the fact that this by-election just happened in the riding next to yours. How strong a message do you think voters were sending this government, and do you think it has been received?
Well, Vassy, you know as well as I do, when a party has been in the government for 8, 9 years, it happens every time. There's a certain amount of fatigue that sets in, and it can be fatigue with the party, it can be fatigue with the current situation, the state of the economy, it can be fatigue with the leader. That happens all the time. But there's going to be a very important election in the coming year. And I would say to Canadians that, look very carefully at what each of the party has to offer. And here I will be a little bit political. Mr. Poilievre has made it very clear what he doesn't like about the current government. But apart from saying he's going to cut a few things, get rid of them, like axing the tax and things like that, he has not been clear on what he proposes as an alternative. And I would encourage Canadians to hold their feet to the fire and say, okay, you don't like what the current government is doing, and we've heard you loud and clear, but what are you going to propose? And I hope you in the media, people like you, Vassy, are going to insist on not the detailed election platform, but letting Canadians know before the actual election starts what they propose is an alternative to the current government.
Sure, and I think that's absolutely fair. That's what I do all the time, ask them what they're going to do. But I think, my question to you is directed more at some insight as someone who's lived through it all, about why the Liberals are and have been for 8 months 20 points behind a party which, as you characterize it, is opposing without putting much new in the window, yet still is able to maintain a drastic lead over this party. You write in the book that you've always been a Liberal, but a decidedly blue one. Does someone like you still have a place in the party?
I hope so. I hope that the Liberal Party will continue to listen to a variety of people who are perhaps a little bit of the right of the center and a little bit left of the center. I think we all have that's been traditionally the success historically of the Liberal Party, the so-called wide tent, because we've made room for people with slightly different opinions, sort of clustered around the center. So I hope that will continue to be the case, because I think that, at the moment with economic challenges, Canadians are also calling for not only social safety net services to help them getting through these difficult times, but they also expect fiscal accountability.
Okay, I'm going to leave it on that note. Mr. Garneau, the book is called A Most Extraordinary Ride, Space Politics and the Pursuit of a Canadian Dream. It is a great book, and I appreciate you making the time. Congratulations on its release.
Thank you very much, Vassy.